Ryan, appreciate you coming in this morning. I know it's you've been flying all over the world.
Thank you for putting it right next to the airport.
It's a great facility. So, Ryan, you a year ago, you guys bought Shopify Logistics. How's that going?
A year ago this week, basically. It's been a journey. It's been awesome. We totally had to revamp the business from a third-party model where Shopify Logistics is the fulfillment arm of Shopify for e-commerce fulfillment. So it took Flexport into the last mile, kind of end-to-end, all the way from factory floor to customer stores, and built a retail distribution business around it too. It was third-party, so it was like more than 40 sites run by local 3PLs, and we would carve off a little corner of the business. They would. We changed the model to 5 first-party buildings. This is a pretty big room. I think, looking at this, I said it was 8 of these. I think it was more like 16. Each of the buildings about 16 times the size of this room. Like, I mean, just massive, maybe bigger.
Wow.
So it's kind of scary as the guy who pays the rent on these buildings, because I think by the end of the year they'll be around 80% full and profitable. But that requires a bunch of sales effort and energy to go, convert Flexport freight forwarding customers to become Flexport fulfillment customers. But it's fun. I mean, that's what we're pretty good at. That is the growth side of things.
So they had 40 facilities. You guys consolidated into 5.
Yeah, they had 40, but they were third party.
Okay.
And the quality wasn't where we wanted it to be. The operational control is, and actually the biggest problem with having so many sites, on theory it sounds good because you get your inventory really close to the customer, so you can get 1 or 2 day shipping everywhere, one day, same day. But what we were finding was that the sites were too small, and so when we got an order from a customer, if there was more than 2 items, a huge percentage of the time it was shipping from 2 different sites. We were splitting these merchants' inventory too many times. And now the merchants' inventory is consolidated into just a handful of sites.
So this was a startup that Shopify purchased.
Yeah.
Had they made any operational changes from the time that they acquired it to the time that you guys acquired it?
Well, Shopify only owned this business for about 9 months. So you can't do that much. I mean, not that I'm aware of that were major. Of course, they were working hard and doing stuff, but they had actually leased these buildings, so they had the same vision. But I just think, even Toby, the CEO of Shopify, sort of called it a side quest, and their main quest is building software for e-commerce, and this logistics thing was a side quest, and that's our main quest in life, is building the best logistics platform in the world. And so it made more sense as a home for this business inside of Flexport.
A couple of years ago, there was a large belief that a lot of the platforms are going to be more vertically integrated, sort of copying the quote-unquote Amazon model. And we see this among Chinese corporations, the big retailers that have built out their own logistics operations. Do you think that we're now seeing a reversal of that trend where companies realize that they really need to specialize in, if they're going to be in logistics, they need to actually have true logistics expertise and infrastructure?
Yeah, I just think that big software companies just culturally aren't really that suited to running logistics operations. They're more human intensive, different type of labor pool, physical world. The humans are variability machines, and software, like, you can get predictable results every single time out of that algorithm, out of that software. And so it doesn't, all their mechanisms for how they work just don't translate that well into the logistics industry. I think Flexport's unique in that we're a software company and a logistics company, and we're built that way from the ground up. And so we don't consider ourselves like software only. We're happy to have people do work and handle the variation, the exceptions. Logistics, a world of exceptions, in ways that exceptions are complete defects in a software company, and in a logistics business, they are part of life, and you accept them, and you work around them, and you build processes for them, et cetera. So I think that the most valuable companies in the world are software companies these days. Like 6 out of 7 of the world's most valuable companies, and the other one's Saudi Aramco, so kind of separate. And they all they need to interact with the physical world. They need to have logistics infrastructure. This is why I think this business is really strategic for Flexport, is that positions us now to go partner with these guys, build software, build platforms that they can interact with, where their software can talk to our software, and we'll handle the exceptions and the variability and the execution And I don't think they want to go be Amazon. Amazon's sort of unique in that regard, like Flexport, that, hey, we're a logistics company and a tech company.
Do you think Amazon sort of plays by different, I mean, it does certainly play by a different set of rules in the sense that it doesn't have to be capital sensitive. Like it has the benefit through AWS and some of these other initiatives to basically build up this massive infrastructure without really short-term accountability for financial reports and sort of their logistics operation. What is your sort of observation on that?
That is the narrative about them, that they can just, Wall Street gives them a really long leash to go build stuff that other people can't. I mean, AWS has been an incredible cash cow for them. They've also changed that quite a bit. They've dramatically reduced their CapEx in recent years. They've sort of scaled back. I don't think they're going, there was a moment where they were gonna, it seemed like the asymptote was 5 minutes for how long it was going to take to deliver, and now they're sort of like, hey, most people are okay with 2-day shipping. Like, we don't need to get into this 15-minute delivery game that everybody burns so much money on. So I think you're going to see more discipline. We are seeing more discipline from Amazon on the CapEx side. The reality is that AWS is an incredible business. Very hard to unpack how good of a business Amazon retail is without AWS cash cow funding it.
Speaking of Amazon, big story also last year was the Dave Clark experience. From your perspective, what happened? What was the story there?
Well, Dave ran supply chain and logistics for Amazon for 23 years, and we hired him to be our CEO. And he had an incredibly ambitious, talk about capital intensive, let's go big, invest, take Flexport to that level of an Amazon, and the amount of investments we made really kind of exceeded where we were, even though we have a very strong balance sheet. Flexport has raised $2.353 billion. I count the last three. And that in equity capital, and so we have a strong balance sheet, we can invest, but like, hey, we've got a lot of that in capital is meant to ride through the seasons. I mean, logistics is up and down and craziness, and right now we're seeing it in the ocean market. We're going to see more kind of, we need to be ready for all seasons, and it's not meant to go invest in such a short period of time. So I think we just had a misalignment for like how ambitious of a company we should be. We want to be very ambitious. We are ambitious, but like, I don't know, we need to do it all so fast. So there's just a mismatch there at a certain point that became obvious, and we sort of said, okay, we'd lost a little bit of customer centricity to go, hey, let's really take care of the customers that are here today and not just build everything for the future. So at the end of the day, we decided to kind of go back to our roots of, it's not really about going back to the roots from the business model. Like, we expanded the business into an end-to-end technology platform. That's still like very much, we never had a vision alignment. It was more of a timing alignment, misalignment issues.
Yeah, he joined at the peak of ocean container prices, or at least at a point when ocean container prices were much higher inflated.
And capital markets, so.
Yeah, they all compressed at the same time. I mean, the challenge as a founder of raising venture capital in this space is that you've got two compounding issues right now. One is you've got the freight markets. Ocean is recovering, we'll say, much more so than what we see in domestic trucking. We saw what happened in Convoy, and I want to get into that in a second. And then you also have the compounding of the venture capital financing funding markets that have also collapsed. You guys, and Bill covered this yesterday, you guys also acquired Convoy. And I understand that deal took 24 hours to consummate, like a really quick decision on your part that enabled you guys to bring that in-house. What are your sort of comments on and plans for that business?
Yeah, well, we acquired the assets of Convoy. It was bank-owned at that time. They'd abruptly shut down. Probably a long list of reasons for that, but fundamentally just needed more scale than it had gotten to. Because the technology's the best, I'm convinced, and Bill's worked in this industry for a long time, and also convinced that they have the best platform in terms of getting owner-operators with a mobile app digitally enabled to come on board and provide this really high-quality capacity to the market. Just needed twice as much volume as it had to cover their they had invested a lot in technology and other parts of the infrastructure. So we're running it much more lean. We brought around 50 of their top engineers over. So we have the core technology team together that built it. We've relaunched with a really an emphasis on being a neutral platform. Convoy had signed up 400,000 truck drivers, owner-operator drivers. I think it's 65,000 carriers at that time, 400,000 drivers, so small carriers. And that's both a lot of carriers and a lot of drivers and a small percentage of all the truck drivers out there at the same time. And it's a lot in the sense that, well, it's probably more than one brokerage can feed, unless you'd have to be pretty big to keep that many drivers making this the first app you open in the morning to go get your loads. And it's not enough if you wanted to have blanket coverage everywhere on every lane, on every minute, to be the platform with the driver who's the closest. So you're sort of stuck in between a little bit. Our view is, therefore, the strategy should be to be neutral, bring brokers on to allow them to access that capacity and match them with, cover their loads with high quality capacity. Matching with these owner operators, typically you have to go through a load board, which is just hard to get. It's transactionally expensive and hard to vet the folks. And a lot of what I was actually surprised coming from the international industry, international freight forwarding, where there's just way fewer vendors. I mean, we don't have anywhere approaching 400,000 unique vendors on the Flexport international platform. There's 10 ocean carriers. And so we don't have to put nearly as much effort into KYC type fraud detection. Who are these people? And it's like half of all the tech that they built was to do compliance stuff around fraud. And so bringing that to the market, we've been signing up brokers left and right to come on board because, hey, it's a win-win. Like you can't lose proposition, which is if we cover your load, we take a small commission. If we don't, it doesn't cost you anything. And we think that's actually a better strategy because if you can get, if we just went and said, hey, we're going to build an FTL brokerage, we wouldn't be able to feed 400,000 drivers or anywhere probably approaching that to make it the number one place they go every day. Whereas all the brokers in the world collectively, could tap into that capacity and spin the flywheel. So even more drivers sign up and you get even better coverage and over time really have a truck driver wherever you need one.
Yeah, the fraud issue is pretty rampant in trucking. And to your point, it's such a more fragmented market. One of the conversations, Biden came out 2 years ago and talked about the cartels that are the ocean container lines and how much power they have over pricing. What is it you're seeing right now?
On the ocean side?
On the ocean container side.
I definitely wouldn't use that language as a cartel, but it's quite a competitive market as evidenced by the fact that, last year the price of ocean freight was so cheap, they were all losing money on every shipment again. And they did that for 10 plus years. And when prices went crazy, prices went to the moon during the pandemic, $20,000 in the spot market to ship a container. Long run, historical average, probably like $2,000. So a 10x kind of price increase. When that happened, all the carriers went collectively and bought a ton more ships. There's 30% increase in container shipping capacity coming online by the end of 2026. In a cartel, you don't have that sort of, hey, let's go expand the capacity of the market 30% because an increase in supply will bring prices way down. So it's a very competitive market. Now, freight is a very inelastic market, meaning whenever demand exceeds the price, you're just going to keep shipping. The amount of stuff you ship is not related to the price of shipping. Mm-hmm. It's related to the margins of your, the demand for your products. And so price currently, as we sit today in June of 2024, because of the disruptions in the Red Sea where the ships are having to go around the Cape of Good Hope, Southern Africa, that has dramatically reduced the effective supply of shipping in the container shipping market. That reduction in supply, demand is pretty strong for a number of reasons, but consumers seem to be doing all right, especially in the United States. That currently there is more demand than supply for container shipping. A lot of those ships that have been ordered, you're going to see deliveries every month for the next 2 years. So I predict by this time next year, you won't have this problem. But currently demand is exceeding supply. Price gets bid up in the spot market to whoever's willing to pay the most. And so right now we're seeing a container from Asia to the U.S. is like $6,000. So it is about 2-3 times more than it was this time last year.
Yeah, it's a crazy commodity in the sense that unlike a lot of physical commodities, you can't store it. And people do not move product unless there's demand on the other side. And it's always hard for people on the outside to understand. They're like, hey, it's cheap, people are gonna move product. It's like, there's no demand, people aren't moving product. One of the ways to sort of understand, and people love to translate what's happening in the freight markets, and rightfully so, into what's happening in the economy. What's your perspective right now on the strength of the US economy?
I don't have a really strong view. Try to be ready for whatever happens. It's so easy to be a naysayer and predict the levels of government debt, and there's like a lot of institutional rot at a lot of companies that I see that don't seem that well run, and yet, man, it's very hard to bet against the United States with the geography that we have, the number one oil producer, food producer, the river networks. I mean, there's so many benefits that the United States has, and like we kind of only hold ourselves back. But I have no real view on the macroeconomy. I don't know how people predict these things. It seems like, I'll give you the example, is from COVID. When COVID hit, there's not a single economist, and I've said this many times and no one has challenged me, so maybe I'm wrong if you're out there and you made this prediction, but there's not one economist on planet Earth who predicted that volumes of international trade would go up as a result of the COVID pandemic. Now, everybody predicted, because in every prior recession, volumes of trade went down.
Yeah, there was a big collapse that happened, in January when we saw China shut down, and then all of a sudden it sort of rolled through
like
Europe.
a month.
Yeah, it was.
And then it went to all-time highs, and nobody predicted that. So then you're like, well, maybe we should stop trying to pretend that we have these predictive powers. I predicted. I'm not claiming to be better, but not one economist on Earth made that prediction, which in hindsight we can make obvious, like, oh, well, if you're not able to travel and go to hotels and buy services and restaurants and stuff, you still got money. You're gonna, especially the government flooded everybody with money. You're gonna buy a bunch of stuff on Amazon to get your dopamine hit, and it led to crazy increase in goods purchases. But ex post you can rationalize that, but ahead of time nobody predicted that.
So Ryan, speaking of COVID, you were like the hero, or at least the broader media. It was interesting sort of watching this play out as a venture-backed company and as a journalist that covers this industry, watching it go from, an interesting Silicon Valley, interesting company that you're a founder, really founders doing profound things around logistics and supply chain, to all of a sudden becoming a sort of mainstream hero of sorts for the COVID crisis, this sort of supply chain crunch. You made the cover of Forbes, you were on 60 Minutes. What was that experience like of becoming sort of the face of the supply chain crisis? And this all, as my understanding, started with a tweet thread that you wrote about the port of Long Beach, the port of LA.
I would not use the word hero for me posting on Twitter. In fact, actually, I would say, we really, the stuff that we did do that I was very proud of, that I thought was, if you're going to use the word hero, was really about Flexport shipping masks to hospitals. So in the very beginning of the pandemic, we got a lot of attention for that, I think rightfully so, and we on purpose, because we wanted to get eyes on this problem, which is all the hospitals ran out of masks at the beginning of COVID. And at that time, we didn't know how dangerous it was, and it seemed like a civilizational sort of, if doctors don't have masks, and the nurses, in Oakland, the nurses were threatening to go on strike and not show up at the hospital because they didn't have any masks. And one of the problems, we figured out very early on that there were lots of masks available in Asia, mostly in China. They'd really ramped up production, but 50% of all the world's air freight flies in the belly of passenger planes, and they were all grounded because of nobody's traveling. And so you couldn't there wasn't enough air freight capacity to get these masks into the country. And we saw that problem and sort of said, this is just unacceptable. Like, we're a logistics company. Let's figure out how to get these masks into the country. All the hospitals in the United States are used to buy, historically pre-COVID, would buy all their goods from a medical distributor. And those guys ran out of masks. Well, these hospitals are very well connected. You know, UCSF has Mark Benioff on the board. Mark Benioff is friends with Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba. Like, he can get masks for these guys. He did. He bought like millions, $20 million worth of masks or something like that. So they had the masks ready to go. They just needed help importing it and doing air freight. I'm like, well, we can do this. And if you listen to that statement of the problem, all of the passenger planes are grounded and not flying. The solution to the problem is actually in the problem statement. You're like, well, there's a bunch of passenger planes grounded. And so we made, me personally and others at the company, made a bunch of phone calls to the passenger airlines and said, can we borrow your planes? And a bunch of them donated planes, Delta, United, all the major American carriers, Atlas Air, which is a cargo airline, but wanted to help on this, donated aircraft or gave it to us. We chartered a Dreamliner 787 for $200,000 round trip to China. You own Flying Magazine. You probably know the price of flying a Dreamliner to China and back.
Oh, yeah.
Delta gave us great deals. And we just stuffed these things to the gills with masks, overhead compartments, seats. We ended up shipping 500 million masks and equipment, PPE units to hospitals on 5 continents. So I feel like that was actually really valuable, important work that we did. We also onboarded most of the hospital networks in the United States as importers because they'd never imported anything. They used to buy, and now it turned out they weren't registered with CPB and FDA and needed to, they were like a newbie importer, which is what Flexport's kind of made for, to make it easy for small business to import. Originally, that was our main focus segment. So we got all these guys registered and importing, clearing, registered and importing goods. The Long Beach stuff, which is what I did get more attention for that, which is when just trying to figure out what happened. Why are there 100 ships off the shore of the port of Long Beach? This was a little bit later in the pandemic as the congestion built up. I don't think I had any actual impact there. I just got a lot of attention. It was good for Flexport. It put me on the cover of magazine and stuff. But, at the end of the day, I wasn't able to change the way that goods are cleared through the port of Long Beach or fix that problem. But
I thought, it's interesting because there was the industry conversation, and then there was the sort of broader media conversations or the mainstream media. It was interesting because it was like, in so many ways, I thought the profile of you as a person actually was really important for this industry because so often our industry is ignored by the broader media. It's almost as if, I use the description supply chain is often like the utility companies. Like people don't think about their power company until the power comes out.
Yep.
And they're not thinking about the internet company until they're paying the bill or the internet's out. And all of a sudden, when it isn't working the way it should, and we all know that it's funny how often people who know nothing about logistics are surprised that stuff breaks. And you're like, this is every single day. Like supply chains are always breaking. And I think it was really important because it gave the opportunity for the broader public to be aware that you as a person were multiplied by thousands of other folks doing, and potentially millions of folks doing this really hard work of really keeping things running. What is, in terms of sort of, now that that's sort of over with, we had supply chain disruptions. We haven't had what most people would experience as a personal supply chain crisis in the last 2 years. What has happened in sort of that post-environment where, in the investment cycle of venture capitalists, how are they viewing this industry and sort of what's the broader public?
Yeah, I do. You call it a utility company. I use that analogy a lot. Yeah, you flip the light switch and by the way, when you flip a light switch in your house, you're controlling this one of the most complex pieces of infrastructure ever built by humanity is the electrical grid. And you're controlling it. There is a probably coal-fired power plant that's getting a little bit hotter just for you on demand to create that extra bit of electricity that you have asked for. You are actually controlling that power plant. And that is how we think our supply chains work. But actually, you're flipping that. There's a bunch of Excel files getting emailed and duct tape and like
faxes going off.
Oh man, it is like not the way you think it is if you're a normal person out there. So I think actually one of the things we as an industry should aspire to is build something as great as the electrical grid, to like earn that right, to be at that level, that there is an on-demand, hey, you flip this switch and all this automated systems kick in, and you order that item on Shopify site, and on somewhere in the queue, one more item is teed up for production back at the factory somewhere in the world and put into the order management system to eventually get on a container and replenished. We're not there at all. It's one of our visions at Flexport, but it's something that all of us should aspire. We're all going to be a part of that at this conference. I think that I like the utility analogy. I think we're also sort of like the offensive lineman of the business world, where the offensive lineman is like actually key to running a good football team, but you don't pay attention to these guys unless they commit a penalty, right? Yeah. It's similar. The industry. My view I'll answer your question about the venture capital side, but I think that my view of this, Flexport has always tried to position our marketing, and I think FreightWaves is kind of the poster child for this, but we do marketing as education. Like I think the days of self-promotion, people think we're like big self-promoters or something, but I don't, maybe because I post on social media or something, but if you look, I'm very rarely am I saying Flexport's the best. I'm usually trying to shine a flashlight into this black box of global trade and say, how does this all work? And being able to show that you're a thought leader. In a world of social media where anyone can post anything, self-promotion is just dead. Because everyone can say I'm the best, but like it doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you can actually provide content and education and say, hey, here's how this world works. Did you know? And I've frankly, coming into this industry, is shocked that there was such an opportunity available to go shine the flashlight inside the black box of global trade and logistics and say, how does this work? And people are super curious about how it works.
It's shocking how rare, because you're very visible, and obviously I'm as well on X. It's shocking how rare for anybody, CEOs of big companies and founders of even small companies, how rare in this industry that they're actually talking about the issues and being public about it. And frankly, because it is such a few number of us that are actually doing it, how frankly easy it is to become, to gain awareness and be able to evangelize.
There's a couple of thoughts I have on that. One is that, one of the most the reason it works is because there's almost nothing more powerful than taking something that someone thought was boring and showing them that it's actually interesting. Like that creates this moment of like, it releases some dopamine in your brain whenever that happens to you. And so this industry's, people think it's boring, but it's not. It's the backstage pass of the world economy. How could that be boring? I think that part of the problem is it's a very hard industry to crack into. Flexport is, I think on the Trans-Pacific, which is the world's largest trade lane, we're the 6th largest freight forwarding business out of that. There's 20,000 freight forwarders on that trade lane. We're the only one in the top 100 founded after Netscape was created in 1994. And so it's a very hard industry. I'm not saying we're better than these guys, but they're not new founder-led technology companies. They are largely been around for 50 or 100 years. That gives them a lot of competitive advantage against us in many ways. But what it also means is that they have a professional managerial class running the business. And it takes a little bit of risk taking to go out, put yourself out there. And why take that risk if you're a professional CEO who managed to work your way all the way up to the top of this company? It's a
totally different.
The board could just fire you. And I
say something that, like, it's interesting how often I talk to founders. Matt Silver, he was here yesterday. I don't know if he's still in the room. When he started his second venture, which is doing cross-border commerce, how cautious he was early on in his first venture to post, and now he's sort of ruthlessly posting, and how that's created this sort of air of importance. But I often see how interesting it is for, like you said, because of the risks associated with it, but also people are afraid of it's a brutal place. If you say something on X, chances are you're going to invite someone that's going to, shitpost you.
Oh, I have, apparently. I've blocked them all, but apparently a lot of people hate me on the internet. I don't see it all. But
it comes with the territory.
other thing is that the type of person in a logistics, a hyper-rational, in theory, hyper-rational, logical, you can measure everything, you can build a metrics-based operating system for a company of like, how do we execute? Marketing is not rational. Because the rational ideas have already been tried and someone has done everything that's rational. So therefore it won't work. You won't stand out if you're doing rational stuff. You have to do things that are a little irrational if you want to stand out. So the type of person who rises to the top of a logistics company is unlikely to be irrational enough to do really good marketing. You're going to try all this logical stuff because all day long you make logical, rational decisions to run your company, and then it comes to the marketing piece. You're like, oh, we got to try some stuff. Like we sent it early days. I got a lot of attention for renting a boat and at the port of Long Beach and going around. Probably the best marketing I've done. I got on the cover of Forbes, but the week before that, I was trying to figure out what's going on at the port. And the week before, okay, you've got this problem. How are you going to figure out what is going on at this port? I sent a taco truck to the port and gave free tacos to the union, to the longshoremen, and then just talked to them all day. Because I don't know that many longshoremen personally. I should probably, but I don't. But I know that they like tacos. I just assume. And like it was such an irrational idea. It took me. I had to get 4 different people at Flexport. I told them to do this, and they just wouldn't. Because I come up with a lot of irrational ideas, so they assumed I was joking. But I was like, finally, I cornered the guy who runs our LA office. I was like, I am actually serious. I need you to send a taco truck to the port. And that actually is what teed off. It was talking to longshoremen who told me their theory was that the truckers were lazy, because truckers were missing their appointments. And I'm like, this doesn't quite add up. I mean, originally, the reason I wanted to talk to the longshoremen because the truckers were telling me the longshoremen are lazy. And that's what's causing the congestion. I was like, there's some disconnect here. They're both blaming each other. What is really happening? But there was an illogical thought pattern that allowed me to crack into that. And I think that's something that founders maybe have a permission to do. Because being irrational, when your idea is bad, you get fired.
Yeah.
When your idea is good, you look like a hero. I mean, you're always skirting that line. So you need to have a little bit more permission to experiment.
Does your team have a 48-hour rule on when you say something, you have to repeat it?
They know I don't drink, so at least they can.
There's no late night.
They're not worried about that. Yeah, I mean, not all of my ideas are good, but that's the point. Is like you've got to be able to try some stuff, and some of it won't work for sure. Your question was about venture capital and how has the world changed in that regard. Yeah, I mean, I think that logistics was hot. Actually, probably the biggest impact on our business from the changes in the venture capital world is that Flexport probably ships for like 80 or 90% of the direct-to-consumer e-commerce businesses out there. I mean, I don't know if that stats really, but it seemed like it at one point. Like if you looked up any major D2C venture-backed e-com business, they were probably doing their freight forwarding with Flexport. They have had a really hard time of it on 2 levels. One is Apple changed their privacy rules. So their Instagram ads stopped working. They couldn't retarget everybody, and so a huge percentage of them had a massive impact on their functioning of their business model, which was driven by social media ads. At the same time, or around the same time, that venture capital decided these D2C businesses, maybe related, but venture capital decided these things weren't really venture backable. It was never a big percent. It was probably like 15-20% of our volumes. But every year we were having, for our first 5-10 years, and for our first 5 or 7 years in business, we would have 3 or 4 breakout kind of next gen e-com D2C businesses, and we lost that. And I think that actually was the biggest impact on our business. We're lucky that we were insulated from what's happened in capital markets to an extent because we've raised a lot of money. We have a really strong balance sheet, and I don't think that was luck. I saw I can't say I was predicting the future. I'm not good at that, but I could see the past and go, hey, it's pretty rare to be able to raise this kind of money this quickly, this easily, on good terms. We should put that money in the balance sheet and be ready for whatever the world throws at us. And so that turned out to be good decision making at that time.
A lot of conversation about the reindustrialization of the Americas. You guys historically have been Trans-Pacific. That's been, as you talked about the sort of large position you guys have. How are you looking at cross-border?
Yeah, it's I do think that from a strategy standpoint, the way we've looked at the world was pretty agnostic. We're good at finding customers and selling them on the value proposition of having a single pane of glass to manage your end-to-end supply chain and make freight forwarding so easy anyone could do it. We didn't really care where the stuff was coming from. We woke up about 5 years ago, realized we were super concentrated specifically on the China to US lane. Actually, now it's more than 5 years ago when the Trump tariff started hitting, and we were very exposed. We still are more indexed on the China to US trade because, frankly, we just followed the customers where they went. About 5 years ago, we started to say, hey, we need to be a little more strategic. Let's find customers based on where they are shipping from. Our first diversification was actually into other parts of Asia and in Europe. We have offices with our own people selling on the ground in 15 countries. We're basically all over East and Southeast Asia and India. We haven't gone big in cross-border yet. It's a big investment. We've gone in domestic trucking with Convoy. We're actually shipping a fair amount to and from Mexico, but on the ocean side, from Asia to Mexico. You'll see us make moves in that space, but it's like a concerted investment effort that needs to get made for cross-border trucking in the U.S., and maybe we do it via partnership. We've made a couple of investments in cross-border startups that are doing pretty well, doing trucking, but it's not a big focus area. One of the things we've learned is you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything, and so for the moment, we haven't. But the cool thing that we've learned as we've opened in Korea and Southeast Asia, Vietnam, et cetera, India, is that when you launch these markets, you don't just connect that market to the U.S., but you connect all that market to all the other markets you're in. And so we are shipping from intra-Asia, from China to Vietnam happens. Machinery goes down there. You're shipping goods intra-Asia. I think it's now the second largest trade lane in the world is within Asia. So I assume that we'll see that when we do launch in Mexico eventually. We'll not only connect Mexico to the U.S., but connect Mexico to Europe and to Asia, because Mexico imports a lot of the raw materials for their manufacturing.
A lot of conversation recently about the companies that are border skipping in some ways, sort of manipulating the U.S. tariff sort of regime. We saw last week a report about Seco that was got cited by the Customs Border Patrol for violations. What are you guys hearing about that? How is that sort of playing out in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it manipulating. This is it is the law of the land that passed by U.S. Congress that allows de minimis exemption to goods under $800. You don't pay duty, and you don't like it. Vote for somebody else. But that is the law, and it is your patriotic duty to minimize the amount of tax that you pay. So I don't think we should, I don't think there's a big problem from my perspective. I think everything should be duty free. So let's go. What's happened is CBP in the last couple of weeks has signaled and taken some action to tighten compliance processes around these parcels that are flowing in. The stat that I read, maybe on FreightWaves, is so far this year, 700 million parcels have come in under the de minimis exemption. And we're not even halfway through the year. Last year, there was 1 billion for the year. So you're sort of looking at a 50% growth rate year over year. So it's a massive amount. CBP is trying to get their head around their processes around, okay, what's our inspection regime for these things going to look like? That they are flowing in at a rate that they're not. I think the inspection rate for an ocean container is around 1%. Well, if you were to inspect 1% of 1.5 billion parcels, that's a lot of customs inspections that they are not set up to execute at that level. So you're going to see tightened controls from a inspection compliance perspective. Last week, or the week before, I can't remember now, CBP temporarily suspended the license of, I think I read that it was 15 brokers that are doing these. We don't have inside, we've talked to people at CBP about it. We do these, we do have that permit. We do a fair amount of those transactions. We don't have inside info into exactly what happened. We've got some anecdotal stories, but I think fundamentally CBP wants to see that you have you're exercising the same level of control and relationship with that customer and control over how the goods are being classified as you would on any other shipment. And they were seeing too many shipments where the products were having generic HS code classifications that weren't matching, that weren't, sort of copy-paste jobs of a billion parcels. And they're saying that's not acceptable. I understand, and I don't know if this is Seco specific or one of the other brokers. There were a bunch of them that were kind of suspended, that they were not, CBP would put a hold on a parcel and say, hey, we need you to hold this one. And they had not been able to exercise that control and hold it back and give it to CBP for inspection. They had just gone ahead and delivered it. And CBP said, hey, this is totally unacceptable. So yeah, you should expect to see more enforcement of it. What happens to that? It's not, what happens to that regime of the de minimis exemptions? It requires an act of Congress to change. It's not an executive order because this is the law of the land. So Trump or Biden can't, Trump gets elected or Biden gets elected, they can't unilaterally just do an executive order to change this. So we'll see. I don't know what there's a couple bills that might make it so that if your goods are subject to the Section 301 duties out of China, you can't do de minimis. There's one bill that would lower the value from $800 to $200, which is back where it was 5 or so years ago. That one wouldn't matter that much. I mean, most of these goods are, $15 or whatever. Yeah, it's not usually over cheap. 200, but the China one would probably have a pretty big impact.
I haven't figured out what the difference between TN and Shein and Wish that has gone away. I think is Wish still around?
I don't know.
It's a Ryan.
I spend more than $5 on my jeans.
Everything I bought, I haven't bought anything on Temu or Shein, but I used to buy stuff on Wish to test it out, like little toys, and they're all just junk. Stuff you find at like Family Dollar. That's just
you reveal your privilege when you people like cheap junk. So
a lot of other conversation that's happening around the idea of reindustrialization and what's going on with companies repositioning their supply chain and sort of friendshoring or deglobalization. Take your take on that. How are you guys thinking about, and what are you hearing from your customers around supply chain resiliency and sort of moving their production to other parts of the world?
There's a lot of that going on, and it's gone on for many, many years. China has become more and more expensive to produce stuff as their labor costs have gone up. And by the way, labor costs going up is like probably good for China, right? They're paying their workers more. But business has always sought cheaper sources to manufacture, and that's been going on I remember 10 years ago at an ocean freight conference talking to an ocean carrier who told me they were shipping thousands of containers a year of used machinery from China to Vietnam to moving factories. That's been going on for a long, long time. And anyone who can will move to the cheapest source of labor that can produce their products successfully at a high quality point. So that's gone on for a long time. Turns out it's a little overblown. I mean, trade with China has not gone down. I think it might be at an all-time high. I mean, it turns out they're very good at manufacturing. And for certain categories of products, it is the place to get your goods made. And, business is about making money and making high quality products. And that if they're the best at it, that's who you're going to do business with. And but tariffs have had an impact. I think businesses are looking at that, and it's a big part of the cost picture, and they will react to that. So I don't know how much of it is resiliency versus just finding cheaper stuff somewhere else. I think that a lot of the resiliency stuff made sense when you found out you weren't resilient, but then the moment your stuff's functioning again, you forget about it. People have a very short memory.
Yeah, a lot of the sort of old practices of just cheapest cost is sort of taken.
It costs a lot of money to have resiliency. And when you're getting measured quarterly by Wall Street, you're going to sit on a whole bunch of inventory just in case. I mean, the mask one is a really interesting case where we didn't have enough masks in this country for the pandemic, and we almost had like civilization level incident of collapse. I mean, thankfully the COVID didn't have that kind of mortality rate, but if it had a higher mortality rate, I think your hospitals could very well stop functioning. People just won't show up if they're going to high probability of catching a disease, they're going to die. So, okay, you should have enough mass in storage somewhere. But you're going to sit around for 10, 20 years on these mass just in case you need them? Like, what public company is going to sit on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of inventory for 10, 20 years? Who's got the long leash from Wall Street to execute that? It's a hard thing to tell your investors if you're a public company CEO. Oh yeah, just in case I've got this rainy day inventory stash. They've all been trained by Wall Street to, by business schools to inventory is evil. Don't keep any of it in stock. And fundamentally, resiliency is for a shipper is about having excess inventory.
Yeah,
it's a very hard thing to tell your board.
Ryan, bold prediction for back here 5 years from now. What is the conversation that we're having in 5 years?
I assume it'll be about what AI has done to take stuff that we thought wasn't going to be automatable, that's taken us 10 years to wrangle data into structured ways that we can write scripts and algorithms to process and take some action against. And it's turned out to be really, really hard to where all of a sudden AI can just do it. I mean, we see this with our ocean freight contract ingestion. If anyone ever looked at an ocean freight contract, it is a giant Excel file that has thousands and tens of thousands of rows and port combos and if-then statements, and it's very hard to ingest this data, parse it. We write scripts to do it, but the contracts aren't even in many cases generated by a database. They're humans like editing the Excel file on their side. And so they break. The parsers that you write to ingest this data and put it in your database break. Turns out OpenAI and others can just take that. It was taking us a couple days to ingest that thing and get it live into our marketplace, and now it's a few minutes that you can just have AI can do it. And I think you're going to see that across the board of like so many processes that were requiring manual intervention are now able to be subject to AI. I think you're going to see, people are kind of sick of buying software. Businesses are like, the software in many cases has not lived up to its promise. It's made your business more brittle. It's cost a lot of money. You need like full-time people to administer. Workday is a nightmare. We pay for Workday. I'm like, I got full-time people administering it. I think you're going to find that AI will let these software companies change their business model, just providing a service for you and charging you for it. Or like Zendesk, you pay, I don't know what Zendesk costs, HR support software, customer service support software is $50 a month or something per seat. Well, you're paying $4,000 a month per seat for the customer service person. Mm-hmm. I think you'll see business models change where Zendesk can just charge you, instead of charging you $50 a month, I charge you $500 a month, but I am the customer support person.
And it's all AI driven.
I think you'll see a lot of that type of stuff. And we should be, as an industry, well positioned to benefit from that. You've got the fundamental thing now is data. Do you have the data? And these logistics companies are sitting on mountains of interesting data to train the AI to make better decisions. So I assume that is going to be the topic. It should already be the topic of conversation, but that's where you'll see 5 years from now, it'll be everybody's talking about that.
Ryan, unfortunately, we're out of time. Really appreciate you coming to here to Atlanta.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Ryan Petersen, everyone.